Welcome, everyone. I'm so excited to get to host Linda for the Danish community to share about her new book. I have read it, just finished it this morning, and I loved it. I was, yeah, completely just got more and more sucked into it as the story unfolded, and it's so wonderful.
Oh, and I saw a couple people hold theirs up. How sweet. Thank you. Beautiful.
So for those of you who don't know Linda, I guess most of you probably do. Linda has been a psychotherapist for more than 40 years and in the principles for 20 years.
2020.
Yeah. And I have had the pleasure of knowing Linda since 2017. And I have loved being able to have her support through my journey in the three principles and to be my mentor and great support through it all. So welcome, Linda.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And we didn't super structure this, so I'm kind of showing up in the moment and willing to answer questions and have a conversation. This doesn't have to be about, my talking endlessly, which anyone knows who knows me knows that I can do. But how many of you have either can use your virtual hand or your regular hand? How many of you have actually had a chance to read the book? Okay, so most of you have not, which is good for me to know. So maybe I can. Dorda, did you have anything that you wanted to start with, or should I just launch in?
I think you should go ahead and share your wonderful stories.
Okay. So first of all, thank you for creating this opportunity for me to come. I love every chance I get to work with Dorda and Lars. I've seen them live at several things that Bill and I have done in Copenhagen, and that's been really beautiful. And I love the work that they're doing, and hope this will just be support for them and for that. So um, the book, Leaning into Curves, actually started in my mind with a desire to leave a memory of my late husband, Jim, for my grandchildren who never met him, because he died long before they were a gleam in my daughter's eye. and and I had a wonderful relationship with my late husband. He was a remarkable individual. He was 20 years older than I was and a Roman Catholic priest when I met him. And it was an unlikely relationship for that reason. I was a very strict Catholic woman. I'd been raised very staunchly Catholic, was only 24. So I was a baby. I look back and I think, oh my gosh, that was a big thing to take on, to be married to someone who was 20 years older than I was, had served in the missions, had been in the Philippines living for over 20 years, and was a recovering alcoholic. He came back to the States to actually go into alcoholism treatment as a priest. Uh, and I met him the night before he was going into treatment. But I knew instantly that he and I were meant to have a relationship. And as I write in the book, I went home that night and was in the bathtub actually writing in my journal, and wrote, much to my surprise, that I had just met the man I was going to marry. And I think before that point, I was aware of intuition, but that night something really woke me up to this sense that there was something behind life that was guiding me, and that it was coming to me via thought. because I can't say that I had a vision. I can't say that I heard anything. It just was this powerful thought. You've just met the man you're going to marry. And it was an interesting situation to be in as a 24-year-old woman. On the one hand, having this deep knowing that that was a distinct possibility, and yet intellectually, my intellect was fighting that. That's not possible. I can't seduce that man. And I don't want to be married to someone who's 20 years older than I am and who is a recovering alcoholic. And no, that's not the man I had envisioned as a soulmate. So I was aware of this, just sort of like, well, what do you trust? You trust that deep inner knowing? And I couldn't have told you this at the time, but as I was writing the book, it I suddenly realized that I had a new definition for intuition. I really saw that as I looked back over my life at all the times when it popped up, that it was really the what I think of as the spiritual eye of love flying wide open, and love seeing with crystal clarity a possibility. So I want to share just a really interesting little thing that Bill and I have been talking about. I think most of you probably know that I'm married to Bill Pettit. He has a very strong interest in the neurosciences and medicine, which I share. Not so much the medicine part of it, but the neuroscience part of it. And he's been reading a book called Determined by Robert Sapolsky, who is one of the leading scientific thinkers of our day. He's an incredible integrator. He integrates material across a wide range of science specialties. And one of the things that Sapolsky is fascinated by, and it fascinates me, is that we now have conclusive neuroscience research that shows that our brains and our bodies are preparing for the next action we are going to take long before we become conscious of it. Now, in a way that makes common sense. Let me give you a really common sense example. When our blood sugar is dropping and our bodies are starting to need nourishment, there are all kinds of things that start happening neurochemically in our body system to prepare us to eat, to prepare us for digestion. And at some point in that process, we feel hungry. I don't know what happens with you when you feel hungry, but my stomach starts to tickle a little bit. Sometimes it growls. There's a sensation of, yeah, I'm ready to take some food in. I need some nourishment. Well, the body has already set up everything that's needed for us to become consciously aware of our hunger, and then we do something to satisfy it. But all of what the body needed to do to get ready to digest has already happened. I mean, the body is an amazing thing. Well, that is going on with everything. The body seems to somehow know when we're going to need to run, when it's time for us to write, when it's time for us to see something, when we're going to have an insight. All kinds of things are already occurring dynamically in the body before we know it. And this fascinates Robert Sapolsky, who's writing about this, and he has suggested that we don't have any free will, that life is streaming through us and we can't do anything about it. And that's why he calls his book Determined. But Sapolsky says we have free won't. We have free won't. WON'. So we can say, And it makes common sense, doesn't it? We can say, yeah, I feel hungry, but I'm not going to eat. I'm going to force my body to lose weight. Or I don't have time to eat right now. I'll eat an hour or two later and just endure the hunger. So I would say that's another way that Sapolsky is not acknowledging that we very definitely have free will, that there is something pulsing through us moment to moment to moment, guiding us, guiding our behavior, and it is optimal. Sapolsky acknowledges that whatever this force is, it is guiding us optimally. It is guiding us toward the good. It is guiding us in an evolutionary way to function well. But we also have this incredible capacity to say, no, thank you. And Sapolsky says and talks about that when we say no, thank you, it isn't that the guidance checks out and says, okay, I'm done with you. It just says, okay, that avenue is closed. That's on hold. And I'm just going to continue to guide. So we get hungrier and hungrier and hungrier until eventually most of us do something to satisfy the hunger because the guidance continues. And it always is continuing in the direction of that evolutionary optimal functioning. It's creative in that way. So as I was writing, leaning into curves, that's really what I saw, was that through everything, through every curve life has thrown at me, whether it was meeting a 44-year-old man who was a Roman Catholic priest who would subsequently become my husband for 18 years before he died, or in small ways, in the decision to pursue a doctorate in psychology, in the events that culminated in my meeting Sydney Banks. There's just no doubt in my mind that love has been guiding me every single step in the way in big ways and small ways, and in ways that are highly unique to me. So I'll give you an example. This did not make the book. Maybe it'll make the next one. But when I was 2 weeks past Jim's death, on Christmas Eve in 1999. It was very sudden. He died in an automobile wreck. He was on slippery roads and didn't stand a chance of survival. And I was pretty bereaved. I was beside myself. I was in a great deal of grief. I was in a great deal of anxiety. I was very agitated. I was finding it very hard to calm down. And one day, I literally, about 2 weeks after his death, felt like I was going to climb out of my skin. I was like literally having an out of body experience. I was in so much anxiety. I was pacing back and forth in the house. And I remember saying to God, you've got to help me right now because I don't know what to do and I can't tolerate this much longer. I am just in so much pain. And right after I said that, I literally heard a voice in my head, just a nondescript sort of voice that said, Linda, write your thank you notes. And I stopped and I thought, oh, write my thank you notes. Well, that makes common sense. I need to get those done. I might as well get started. And so I went over to the table and I got my thank you cards and I started going through the book that had the list of all the people who had come to Jim's memorial services. And I started to write thank you notes. Well, Jim had been a missionary in the Philippines and in Indonesia, so he had friends all around the world. And this was the very beginning of the internet. So I had letters and emails from people he had impacted in the Far East and from priests and from parishioners of his parishes. And so I was overwhelmed with love and appreciation and joy as I was reading all these notes and thinking, how did I get to have a relationship with someone who had such big impact, who had met so many people and who so many people loved so deeply? He was just a really sweet, kind, gentle man. How did that happen? And my heart just started growing in gratitude. And then suddenly I realized, oh, I'm not agitated anymore. I'm calm. Isn't that a great thing? How did I know to do that? How did I know that that was exactly what I needed in that moment to write those thank you notes? Now, I'm a psychologist. If I wrote a book on grief and I said, here's a technique you can follow. When you've had a bereavement and you're feeling really agitated and like you can't stand the anxiety anymore, go write your thank you notes. I think I would probably be laughed off the face of the planet, right? And there would be a lot of bereaved people who would throw the book in a trash can, rightfully, because that was guidance for me. That was what I needed in that moment. And what if that is absolutely a given for all of us, that every single thing we need, no matter what we are experiencing, the brain, the body, guided by mind, mentored by mind, are preparing it for us even before we're conscious of it. And then the more we know about that, the more we trust it, the more we look for it, the more we honor it, the more we ask for it, the more we act on it, the more we get. And I just think of that as love. I used to think of it as, I used to think of intuition as a skill, a gift, a skill, a power that only some people had, and particularly women. You know, we always talk about women's intuition. And as I was trained as a psychologist, I was trained that that was a trait, and it was in varied strengths in different people. And if any of you have ever heard of the Myers-Briggs type indicator, it's a fairly well-known, but not well. It's not a highly credible from a scientific point of view personality measure. But on the Myers-Briggs, I'm a double I, a double intuitor. So you could tout that I'm a double intuitor, right? I really have a lot of strength and power in this. And then what I saw eventually was, no, that's built into the human system, that all of us have intuition. All of us are divine, guided by a divine intelligence that is conscious and creative and evolving. Every single one of us. I got a big reality check around this, and this is one of the stories in the book, when I met Sydney Banks. And I didn't know what I thought about Sid. I felt very quiet when I was in his presence. He had asked Bill to bring me over to Salt Springs so that he could meet me not long after Bill and I were married. I think he wanted to check out Bill's bride because Bill was one of his primary teachers, right? And wanted to make sure that I was cool. And from the minute I met him, whenever I was in his presence, I felt quiet. My mind would just go really quiet. You know, and I would kind of wonder about that because he was not, I don't know how to say this. He was not like a super charismatic, remarkable human being. He was very quiet, very humble. When I met him, he was graying and he was a little stooped. He was very kind of slender, and he didn't physically radiate a big presence, but there was something about his presence that was otherworldly, and I felt it. And all the questions that I brought with me to Salt Spring to ask him just went out of my mind, just completely out of my mind. And I just was like, oh my goodness, just wanting to hear whatever it was that he had to offer. But we went to our first lunch with him, and there was one question on my mind that I wanted to ask him, and it was about intuition. I wanted to ask Sid why I had these intuitive experiences, why I often had premonitions, why I sometimes dreamt things before they happened. And I didn't want to ask that in front of Bill, because I think at that point I thought Bill was a little bit afraid of my intuition. I think he would acknowledge that. There was kind of a witchy feeling about it, like, ooh, sometimes she knows more than I really want to know what she knows about. And so I waited till Bill went to the bathroom. And then I got up my courage and I said to Sid, so, Mr. Banks, what do you think about intuition? What do the three principles have to say about intuition and premonitions? And then I just got really quiet and waited, because this man has been put before me as a major mystic, a major spiritual teacher. And he looked real thoughtful for a second, and then he looked back at me and he said, well, dearie, I don't know. And in my mind, I thought, oh my God, that is not the answer I expected. What do you mean a spiritual teacher doesn't know about intuition? I already knew that it was a spiritual faculty. And then his wife, Judy, who's a dear, elbowed him in the side. And she said, Sydney Banks, you do too know. And Sid kind of looked at her and smiled and looked back at me, and he said, well, Judy, what is it that I know? And Judy said, you know that intuition is available to everyone, that all human beings can see outside the boundaries of time, space, and matter. It's not special. And I remember at that moment feeling a lot of different feelings like rush real quickly through me. One was deflated. Oh, I thought I was special. Two was excitement. Oh, if it's not special, that means I can develop it more. I can claim it and I can develop it more. And three, everybody has it. And if everybody has it, that means that we have a guidance system that's a life raft. It can guide us through everything, everything. And I was really excited to know more about it, but it was real clear that for whatever reason, at that talk, he had this way with me. He would put things out there, and then it would be like, you figure it out, Linda. You've got the capacity to figure it out. So it was fun to write the book. And as I got into it, it grew to be something far more than just a book to leave behind to my grandchildren so they could meet their grandfather. It really was about, wow, I have been given gifts. I have been given experiences of intuition that are very strong. And what if I have been given them in a really strong way, so that I can turn around to other people and say, hey, guess what? We all have this. Yeah, they're kind of especially strong for me, so I can make the point and pay it forward, but everybody has it. And what if the timing is right for this book having been birthed into the world? Because I think most people that I talk to feel like there's something unusual happening right now, that the world feels very uncertain. There's lots going on in our economies, in our political systems, in our spiritual understanding, on our planet. It feels like we are all being asked to step up in new ways and be conscious creators in our lives, and to be more loving in our lives, and to really think more deeply about what that means. And some of us are resisting that. Some of us don't like the fact that this call is asking us to let go of old entrenched belief systems. And so some people are trying desperately to hold on to what was and what is and what has been. But I'm finding also that many people are stepping up and saying, yeah, I'm being asked to think differently. I'm being asked to recognize that love is the answer always. I'm being asked to recognize that forgiveness is the flip side of the love coin. You can't have one without the other. I'm being asked to stop judging myself. I'm being asked to stop comparing myself. I'm being asked to step into my uniqueness as a human being, but also to recognize that the universal power behind that uniqueness is love. And that's the same for everyone. And that's to me how these principles fit in. It's one of the lineages available to people that help them step into a higher level of consciousness, a higher level of understanding of how the human system, the divine human system works. And one of the just byproducts of consciousness and being more conscious in the human system is more highly developed intuition, more highly developed knowing. I know that if we open the floor and I asked each and every one of you to think about a time in your life when you felt intuitively guided to do something that didn't make sense necessarily, or that you doubted, or that you didn't think was possible, that every single one of you would be able to come up with your example. This is a universal gift. It could be anything, even the decision to have a child, or the decision to go live in a certain place, or to follow a degree program, or to help someone on a street corner on a given day. Could be anything. And you followed that nudge, what one of my clients calls a God wink, and something really special, something really beautiful happened. You know, Sydney Banks talked about this. They're actually very, very deliberately, and I didn't notice it the first time. In the book, The Second Chance, within the first couple of chapters, he writes, he's talking about his character, Richard, who is struggling. Richard has cancer, a cancer at the base of his spine. He's also bereaved. He's just lost his wife of only 2 years in an automobile accident. This was a true story. This happened to Sid. He just decided to share it as a fictional story to protect the characters. So he's Jonathan in the story, Jonathan and Mama Leela. He's the teacher. But Richard was an actual human being who walked up to Sid one day in Lahaina and started to talk to Sid about all of his troubles. And as a result of what Sid shared with him, Richard experienced complete healing of his cancer. That is fact. That is the true story. And this part is also true. So when Richard was in Lahaina, he speaks of, which is a small town on Maui, which many of you may know, was recently actually destroyed by a huge fire. Very sad. But as Richard got close to Lahaina, Sid writes, he felt like he was being drawn to Lahaina by an invisible force. He talks about how all the hairs on his body stood on end, and he felt this current of energy drawing him into Lahaina and drawing him to this man who was sitting on the stone wall by the sea. And Sid writes of it, that energetic pull was as tangible as the sidewalk I walked on. That energetic pull that his character Richard felt, Sid wrote of it, was as tangible as the sidewalk I walked on. Now, the only way Sid could write about intuitive knowing that way was because he had felt it. He had experienced it. He knew that the energetic callings and draws, or energetic energies that we feel that come from within to move in a certain direction before we're even consciously aware of them, are as tangible and as real as our fingers' ability to feel each other as we rub them together. They are real. This is an energy that all of us experience. And so my desire to write the book was really to try to write a book about the three principles, but I didn't want to write a three principles book. There are plenty of those out on the market. And I had an experience with Sid one day where I said to him, Sid, I want to write a book and share this understanding with the world. And Sid said to me, when you write a book, Linda, I realized that later, he didn't say, if you write a book. He said, when you write a book, Linda, write your story. And so I wanted to write a book that was just my story, that was stories that described how, either at the time or by hindsight, I recognized that I was being guided by an intuitive force, and that all human beings are. And that if we all become more aware of it, it can be our life raft through difficult times. And so that is what I hope people will read in the book, find a really relatable set of stories that they can connect to and say, oh yeah, that's happened to me. That's happened to me. That's happened to me. Not in exactly in the same way, but that's happened to me. And I deliberately wrote the book in a way that is pretty self-revealing. You know, I laugh. In the book, you'll find references to sexuality. You'll find references to my sexual relationship with my first husband and with Bill, because that's life, that's real, that's part of the human experience. And one of the tangible ways that we experience intuitive knowing, intuitive bliss. I wanted it to be real. I didn't want to hide that I had really struggled in my life. I talk in the book about, you know, that Jim and I were separated for a while. We had a really rough time. I actually was estranged from my daughter for a period of time. It was very, very painful time. And yet when I found the principles after I met Bill, so many things about what I had experienced just clicked into place. It's like I remember when Jim and I separated, I walked around for several years thinking, there's something here that I can't see. This was very conscious. I would think, how can the love that I had for this man, because I was head over heels in love with him, how can it have just disappeared? How can that love have just disappeared? Because I knew love wasn't like that. I knew love was powerful. And I would think to myself, I've never thought of love as capricious, as just coming and going. How can it have just come and gone like that? What's up with that? And when I found the principles and really saw that, you know, that I had created a lot of cloud cover with my thinking that was obscuring my ability to feel the love that was always there, it was revelatory for me. It's like, oh my gosh, that's all that happened. That I just let a lot of thinking, I didn't innocently let a lot of thinking just cloud my vision and obscure the beautiful love that was underneath it all the time. Now, I don't mean to say that you should never divorce, and that if everyone saw this, they would never divorce or go a different way. But what I saw was that if I was meant to leave Jim, it could be done in love. It could be done from a loving feeling. There did not have to be victims and good guys and bad guys. there could just be the ending of invitations to be together. But it happened in my case that when the love came flooding back in a moment of deep forgiveness, I just knew that I wanted to be with Jim again. We just had never been able to complete our divorce. We came back together, and I'm so grateful that we did, because 6 months later he died. And I just felt very blessed that I was intuitively guided and intuitively gifted with what I needed to move into forgiveness, so that when he left, um, we had already been reconnected, and I wasn't left with, trying to make sense of that separation, without really having a means in this world and in this physical life to heal it. So I'm a huge follower of intuition. I'm a huge follower of synchronicities. I watch for things that happen around me to confirm my choices. I love turning other people onto that. Um, and that is what I think of as the wild, intuitive way of love, when we're just really in love and we're listening deeply to ourselves and to life, to what's coming through us and what is around us, and our spiritual eyes just open, and we see possibilities. We see, yes, I could do this, or yes, this is the way to go, or yes, this is an option, or yes, this could be really creative. And we always have that won't power. We often exercise our won't power. And most of the time when we do that, we suffer. After my husband's death, I certainly was in resistance from time to time. I don't want to have to deal with this. This isn't fair. I can't believe God gave me this. God, you must be cold. You must be cold-hearted. No God would allow this to happen to a woman with a 14-year-old daughter who's suffering deeply over the loss of her father. How can that be? I moved into a lot of thinking that was really difficult and resistive, and produced a tremendous amount of suffering and grief. I think grief is an inevitable part of life. I'm not saying it's bad, but it's also paradoxical, because we know, for example, that when people are bereaved or have a sudden loss or any kind of loss, that they're extremely vulnerable to illness for 18 months after that happens. Extremely vulnerable to chronic, difficult illness and accidents. We know that. That's in research. I think that comes out of what we do when we try to hold grief in place. And I saw that I was being guided from the moment it happened. The death happened, and all the way through it, back to love, back to openness, back to a new love. One of my favorite stories in the book is called Snow Diamonds. And that is about a moment that occurred within a half hour after I was informed of Jim's death. I got a call. I was in Michigan. It was Christmas Eve. My family was preparing for a big Polish Christmas Eve. We are Polish Americans, and at Christmas, all the trimmings are Polish, and the whole way it comes down is Polish. And the house was just, in enjoyment and getting ready. And I got this phone call, and my sister-in-law said, Linda, Jim's been in an accident. He didn't make it. And I was horrified. It was an awful moment. And I had to tell my 14-year-old daughter, and she just went into she screamed for an hour. And my family was torn apart. I mean, nobody knew what to do. Nobody knew how to take that in. It was a very difficult moment. But eventually everyone quieted down a little bit. Laura fell asleep. My dad fell asleep. My mom was just kind of in the kitchen trying to figure out what to do with this meal that she was preparing. And I sat on the bed in the bedroom, and I was in Michigan in the United States at the time, and that night there had been a snowfall, and it was a very cold, wet snowfall. And as I looked out on the lawn and the sun had come out, it was like suddenly the sun was prisming all the snow on the ground. And it was like I was looking at a field of prisms. I've never seen anything like it. Like the snow was refracting these beautiful colors like crystals. And I was like, oh my God, that is so beautiful. That is so, so beautiful. And then I thought to myself, how can that be that I've just found out that my husband of 18 years, my lover of 25 years is dead, and I'm still noticing beauty? And I had that thought, how can that be? And then I had another thought, and this was so weird. It was so out of anything that I could have conjured up with my intellectual mind. But a thought dropped in that said, Linda, this is, and it just came as a thought. I couldn't even say this was a voice. Maybe it was, but it was, Linda, what you have just seen is a gift that you are going to spend the rest of your life unwrapping. Beauty is always everywhere. What does that mean? Where did that thought come from? What does that thought point to? But over the next weeks, as I was moving through the early stages of bereavement, and anyone who's gone through that, you have memorial services and dealing with a body and dealing with the beginnings of resolving an estate and burial and all of that stuff that goes with that. So often I would be struck with, wow, there's beauty again. Someone would walk up to me and say, oh, I remember this funny thing that Jim did. And we would start laughing. And I would think, there it is again, beauty. There it is again, beauty. Beauty is always there. So I think of that thought as a divine guidance that came, and it was something that got me through many, many, many moments of difficulty. And I'm sharing these stories hoping that you will touch base with your stories, similar stories. Maybe not about loss, maybe about choices or decisions or experiences you've had in your life, that you'll say, wow, yeah, I really am guided. And you'll be able to offer to others, wow, you know what? You really are guided. I trust this so, and Bill will tell you, if he were sitting here, he would tell you that through me, even through the book, that he has come to appreciate that he also gets these same types of guidance in his own unique way. If there's one thing I would say that I've seen since the book was written and published, it's to talk about how intuition comes through different body systems differently. Like, I experience most of my intuition as a mental thought, just a thought-based knowing. It is not emotional for me. It is just a knowing. And sometimes I hear it as a voice, a clairaudient, and sometimes I'll see a picture. I have had that happen, clairvoyance. But most of the time, it's just this mental knowing. But I also have talked with enough people to see with more clarity, even now than I did a year ago, that some people experience it more in their heart. They experience it more as a heart-based feeling. Just a deep opening of the heart, yeah. Some people experience it more in their gut, about a sensation, like we call it gut instinct, gut knowing. And it just does happen that the brain is not confined to the skull. I mean, neuroscience has proven conclusively that brain cells are in our guts. In fact, that's the biggest center of our brain cells, is actually in the gut. So for some people, there's a gut knowing. Some people talk about it like a solar plexus kind of knowing in the middle of their bodies. Like, yeah, there's just this like knowing that comes from there. I think that's one of the challenges for people is kind of becoming aware of how does it come through for you? How do you experience it? For some people it's a subtle yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. That's just like second by second by second. It's not that way for me. It's a instantaneous mental knowing. But it doesn't matter how it comes through. What matters is that it comes through everyone. And when you get clearer about how it comes through you and you honor it, I will no longer tolerate at all anyone saying to me that intuition, intuitive knowing, wisdom, whatever you want to call it, is woo woo. It is far from woo woo. And that is dangerous to call it woo woo, to dismiss or diminish or demean your spiritual nature. So I don't tolerate that. I used to do that to myself and my own intuition. I would never do that. That's a judgment against a divine gift. That's just not excusable. And it is dangerous. We do that at our peril. I think we're all going to need our intuition to move through the up leveling of consciousness on this planet. And it's going to be highly unique to each of us. And the more we recognize how it comes through, invite it. So here's the other thing that I do think. I notice that if I don't ask for it, it's not that it doesn't come through, but as soon as I ask for it and invite it, it strengthens. It shows up even stronger. So I can give you a little example of this. This is not in the book, but it's one of Bill's favorite stories of it. Uh, we had a little cat. Name was Misty, and she was 21 years old. And at the end of her life, before she died, she went blind. She got high blood pressure, and when cats get high blood pressure, it destroys their vision. And we hadn't caught that. There's no way to catch how a cat suddenly has high blood pressure, right? And she had lost her vision. God, we figured it out when she started bumping into things. And one Christmas, I was outside the house decorating, putting lights up. I'm the one that does that for us. Bill doesn't enjoy doing that. And later that night, Bill and I were sitting in the living room, and I looked over at the couch where the cat usually came and sat in the evening. And I said, honey, where's Misty? Where's the kitty? And he said, I haven't seen her. And I said, we better check. I said, because I'm wondering, when I had the door open and I was putting lights out, coming in and out of the house, I wonder if she wandered outside. I kind of knew immediately that she had. So, but just to be careful and sure, we checked the house. Couldn't find her anywhere. Where Bill took off down outside with his flashlight to see if he could find her. I combed every place in the house that she would sometimes hide or go away to make double sure she wasn't in the house. I went around our whole backyard, couldn't find her. And then I suddenly thought, Linda, use your intuitive knowing. So I went into and sat in a chair, got really quiet, let my mind settle, and I asked, please, I'd love information to know how to find Misty so I can help her. And then I just sat in quiet. In less than 20 seconds, a picture flashed in my mind, and it was a picture of our neighbor's house, 3 doors down, a specific gate. And I thought, I know where she is. I got up, put my shoes on, walked down, stood outside that gate. We didn't know those neighbors, so I wasn't going to open the gate without checking in with them. But I started calling her, Misty, Misty, really loudly because I knew her hearing was also impaired. And eventually, after maybe 10, 15 seconds, I hear this little meow that I recognized as her. went and knocked on the neighbor's door, and they said, "Oh yeah, this little cat showed up in our landscaping earlier today, and we knew something was wrong. We could tell that she was bumping into things. So we figured she must be blind, and we were worried about her because there are coyotes here, they like little cats. And so we took her in the backyard and put her in a safe place and gave her water and have been taking care of her, hoping that someone would come looking for her and figuring that tomorrow we would go door to door and start seeing if we could find her owners." So she was safely home. Well, I trust intuition so much that I know to do that, whether I can't find my cat or my car keys. Because I know that 98% of the time, if I can get quiet enough, I'm going to get the information I need to find them. Well, if mind or God or love or wisdom, whatever you call that intelligence behind life, can guide me to find my car keys or my cat, it can certainly guide me through everything. So I'm going to stop there and see if this has just maybe evoked any questions or any things that you'd like me to talk about a little bit more. You can either raise your little virtual hand or put it in the chat. Or if you want to share a story of your intuition and how it has guided or assisted you, that would be lovely too. For me, the three principles understanding provided a logic for intuition and love. That there is this conscious, creative mind, intelligence. What does the word intelligence mean? That it's smart. It's guiding us toward the greater good, the common good. We're conscious of it because of life, and it's coming through thought. And thought is not just the little ticker tape things that we consciously know of in our mind. It's all the unconscious things that divine mind thinks through us to prepare us and to move us through life. So I see some hands up, so I'm going to call on some people, and I apologize if I garble your names ahead of time. So Nomi, is it?
I just love this topic, so thank you for that. I jumped in a little bit late, but what I heard was wonderful. And it's very freeing to hear you put words to these concepts of intuition. And I just, first of all, just want to thank you for opening up to this. And also because I was a little bit afraid to join the 3P community because I'm one of those who have been into this spiritual wonderland for so long and have developed some of these skills. And the strongest way it came through were through silence. So when I learned how to become silent, very deep silent, in a way of treating in another treatment form, we went silent and really tapped into the consciousness of it all. It came through but in metaphors and in pictures and in symbols and stuff. And in the beginning, when I started to telling people what I saw and felt, and I was pretty much afraid because it was like it's nonsense. But it turned out that it was not nonsense for the listener, because the listener got it. They just knew what I meant, even though I hardly knew what I meant myself. It was just like words coming through, like messages for the other one to understand. I remember one time I had a picture of what is called, figures, something from the mathematic realm, and I'm not at all one to know anything about that. And I said, just, I see these 3 figures. Yeah, I know, she said, I have chosen. And I was just about to say, they want you to choose one. So she was ahead of me in this, and it's just amazing, all these synchronicities that come up in this area. So so it's pretty freeing for me to hear you telling this and kind of making a green light into this area.
That's really beautiful. That's really beautiful. Thank you for sharing that, Naomi. And I'm glad it feels normalized for you and that it's
Mm.
okay to talk about this. I actually do wonder if, based on some of my reading, if there are some of us who are currently experiencing it a little more strongly than others, because we're meant to be guides for the world. We're meant to be guiding people back to their inner knowing and their intuition. So we get a little extra dose of it so that we can step up and say, this is real. But of course we have to own it and trust it ourselves.
And that is a great point, because that is so difficult, or it was so difficult, but not so much anymore. But to stand strong and say, but this is how I experience life. I cannot help it. I cannot do it another way. But it has been a trembling road up to this point where I am kind of happy about it. Yeah.
I'm really glad. And it may be that maybe it works at 90% strength in you, so that you can turn around and say to someone who's got it at 2% strength, hey, guess what? You can take this to 10 or 15 or 20%. And even that increase in the percentage will make a huge difference in your life. But if you didn't have it that strongly, you might not trust it quite as much as you do. Or you might not have the mechanics that you need to have to turn around to somebody else and say, no, you've got this. We've all got this. So please, please step into that knowing and that gift as you feel guided to. I think that's a really beautiful thing. There's someone in the chat who's asked if I could talk more about separating, but in love. And I actually can. And I think the best way for me to do that is by telling a story. I was a psychotherapist for 40 years, and I worked a lot with couples. A very big part of my work was with people who were struggling in their relationships. And I remember when I found the principles and I read George Pransky's book, The Relationship Handbook, which I love. It's really one of the three principles book outside of Sid Banks's books that I recommend probably the most. And when I found that book, I started to do my therapy from that book. It was fairly typical that I would see people and ask them to read 4 chapters at a time, and then we would talk about the book because I found it so healing, such a different take on relationship. And I remember this one couple came in, and they were really struggling. The woman was struggling with an addiction, and the husband had been trying for years to sort of help her, but he was exhausted with it all, and he wanted to leave the relationship, but he was very, very angry at her and very, very angry at what was happening in their lives. And he came in, and he was going to divorce her, and he was going to take her across the coals, and he was going to make her pay. And I said to him that I couldn't tell him whether or not to leave his wife. That's a way above my pay grade. But what I did know, what I did know with 100% clarity was that if the decision was coming from a place of love and a place of forgiveness and a place of peace, that it would be 100% trustworthy. And if it was coming from a place of anger and upset and lack of peace, revengeful thoughts, then I was 100% sure that it was not a trustworthy decision. That much I could offer him. That the only way to be absolutely certain that it was the right thing was to come to that decision in a place of love and understanding, in a place of quiet peace. And he was really upset with me. How is that possible? And I said, well, just hang with me and let's keep working on how to get to a place where you feel at peace and you feel quiet. Because I know that when you feel at peace and you feel quiet, what's right to do is just going to be there right for you. And I worked with him we went through the relationship handbook. We went through some of Sid's books. We watched some of Sid's tapes. We kept talking. And it was a while. It wasn't a sudden thing. Probably 9 months into our work together, he came in and I could just tell something had shifted. And he said, Dr. Pettit, I was sitting in a sandbox with my daughter. He had a 4-year-old daughter. And that was one of the reasons why he was struggling, was that he knew that because of his wife's struggles, he would probably need to get custody of his daughter. And that would mean taking her from her mama. And he just didn't know the right thing to do. And he said, I was sitting with my daughter in the sandbox, and out of the blue, I knew with crystal clarity that I had to divorce. But in that moment, I felt only love for my wife. My heart just opened to her, and I saw how much she was struggling, and I saw how much pain she was in. And yet I knew that the most loving thing I could do to help her was to leave her. And the certainty he felt was so deep that he just followed that. And he went and he pursued what he needed to pursue to get custody of his daughter and to divorce his wife. But he did it from a place of beautiful, beautiful love and understanding. Now, his wife wasn't happy. She was very upset and she battled it. But the more she battled it, the more he met her with love. He really was in a place of neutrality. He saw that she couldn't harm him. She couldn't harm his daughter. That as long as he was in love and understanding and love and forgiveness, that all would be well. He just had a certainty about that. And so the divorce proceeded. And what was really interesting was that his wife subsequently, after he left and moved on, actually, he moved to a different location, his wife subsequently became a client of mine and moved into recovery. And 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 part of what helped her move into recovery was that she really felt her husband's love and forgiveness. And she was able to start loving and forgiving herself and not judging herself so harshly for being not sober, for being a mother who was inconsistent, but in a place of non-judgment and love for herself. She really saw that she didn't want to live the way she had been living anymore. And that through sharing with the principles with her, I was able to help her to see that she had everything she needed to create a different life, to create a different reality. She was not stuck on a level of reality. But as long as she was judging herself, she was just keeping it in place. And as she got more loving and more quiet and more free, she moved into her own recovery and reestablished connection with her daughter and went on with her life. And went on to have, as far as I knew, I was probably in connection with her for several years, went on to have a beautiful life. But all of that was done on both of their parts from a place of peace and from a place of love. We have such crazy ideas about separation and divorce and leaving in relationship and ending relationships. We think that the only way we can do it is in anger and with someone being a bad guy. We simply can't step up to the plate and say, I have learned everything I need to learn from this relationship. And I can leave it in great love. And that's okay. But when we're connected to our divine knowing, we know when it's time to leave, to move on. I thankfully learned that lesson after my experience with Jim, was grateful for that. I knew that if I had known what I knew now, the whole situation I experienced with Jim could have been so much more gentler. But if that were to come to me now, that it was time to leave Bill, that it was time to move on, that the relationship had served its purpose. One of my dear friends who's a psychotherapist had been doing, and primarily a couples therapist, and been doing couples therapy for over 50 years. She's one of the wisest women I've ever met. She has said for years, relationships, the trick with relationships is figuring out whether they're meant to be for a reason, a season, or a lifetime. A reason, a season, or a lifetime. Now, near as I can tell, my relationship with Bill is meant to be for a lifetime. You know, I love the guy. We're still growing. We're still having a lot of fun. We're still learning from each other. You know, neither of us sees that that's going to be ended except on this side of life by death. But if tomorrow it just came out of blue to me, this relationship has fulfilled its purpose, I would listen to that very carefully. But I would also know this: wisdom does not come through one person differently than it does to another. So if it came to me that this relationship was done, that it was meant to be ended because it was meant for a season or a reason, I would totally trust that that was also coming through Bill. Now, sometimes what I've seen with couples, partners, is there's a timing delay. One person will hear it first. And that one person is often the one that has to have the courage to say, you know what? From a place of love and peace and truth, I know this is done. But if it's done in that place of love and peace and truth, the other person will come to it quicker. And I've seen that over and over and over again. So I don't know if I can say anything more about that. If the person who had the question about it wants to ask us a specific thing about it, I'm happy to try to address it. Oh, Gabriella, thank you. She wrote in the chat. I just want to say it was so life confirming and behind the exact story so recognizably because of the oneness. Yes. Yeah, the oneness was real. One of my, I mean, I have all of these stories in the book are favorites, but another one of my favorites is about my my admission to doctoral school, and how my husband and I, it's called Becoming a Mother Doctor, chapter 24. How my husband and I, Jim at the time, had no money. I mean, we were living paycheck to paycheck. We both were working in mental health. Mental health doesn't pay very well. I was working with indigent children, at risk, high risk youth in Toledo, Ohio, here in the United States. Most of the kids I was working with were on what were called shock probation. They had committed some felony crime and been committed to prison for a period of time to shock them into seeing what prison could be like. And then they would be remanded by the courts into the program that I was working in for rehabilitation, for education and rehabilitation, to try to get them able to go back in and integrate in society. So these were what I call bad actor kids. They were good kids, loving kids, wonderful kids, but their acting jobs were terrible. They just were really awful human actors. You know, I can tell you about some characters. But because I was doing that work, which didn't pay very well, we just didn't have the money to go to doctoral school. And so but my mentor kept saying, apply, take the first step, apply. So I applied to 2 schools, got immediately dismissed as not a good candidate by one school. And the other school, West Virginia University, said, you can come for an interview. So there were 200 applicants, and I was chosen as one of 4 who got admitted to the program. But the only way I could go to school was if I got funding. And so the director of the program said to me, we will find a way to fund you. We tried a way to fund all our doctoral students. So there were 4 of us. The other 3 got funding. I did not. They did not have my funding. But the director of the program said, somehow we are going to find you the funding. So we start looking around for housing, because you've got a little girl who's 4 years old. You got to have a place to live if you're going to go to school. And we found this beautiful apartment that we had enough money to rent. We had enough money for the security deposit in the first month's rent. And we had to take it. The guy wouldn't let us wait until school was going to start. We had to take it. So the only plan Jim and I could come up with was that I would move down to Morgantown, West Virginia, which was 300 miles away from where Jim was living in Toledo, Ohio. And we would live separately for a few months. I would get us set up in Morgantown. He would continue working in Toledo. But the day came when school was in the offing. It was starting in 2 weeks. And we had to decide either we're going forward with this or not. And Jim and I talked on the phone and we said, it just feels right. It just feels right. Let's go forward. So he gave his final 2 weeks notice and planned to come down to West Virginia when we still had 0 funding for me to complete my doctoral degree. And right after we committed 100% by having Jim quit his job, the next day, the next morning, the director of training called me and said, Linda, I want you to interview with this lady named Dr. Ann Nardi. She thinks you might be the person she's looking for to teach in their psychology program. I went and met Ann. Ann became a lifelong friend and mentor, hired me immediately to teach in her program. And I taught my way through doctoral school, carrying 3 or 4 courses in ed psych. I left doctoral school with 0 student loan debt, 0. I taught my way through. I got a tuition waiver and a stipend. The very next day after Jim arrived in West Virginia, he got 3 calls from places where he'd submitted his applications. And within a week, he had a full-time job that paid very well. And that also carried us through the program. That was another beautiful example of how commitment, really acting and trusting intuition and saying yes to it, just released a whole series of unforeseen guidances and opportunities that, I don't know, we just could have never counted on. We had no way that they were existing. But I see that as the way the oneness works. When you say your yes and you make a commitment, it supports you. It just supports you with all kinds of opportunity. I absolutely trust that. Bill and I don't have a huge amount of money. We've given so much away free. We haven't necessarily taken as good a care of ourselves as we might have or could have moving into retirement. And sometimes I get a little fearful about that. But the other day I had this thought, it was an intuitive guidance. You know what? There have been many times in my life when I have not had very much money. Many times when I was down to my last dime. But I have always known how to create beauty around myself. Even when I had nothing and was living in the most meager places, I created beautiful spaces around me. I would go to thrift shops. I would get donations of furniture. I would get donations of art, things would come my way and I would create beauty. Like I've always known how to create a beautiful environment around myself. And I thought the other day, I thought, you know what? Even if I lost everything tomorrow, even if money stopped coming in and I had to go live under the bridge near one of the rivers that bring money and bring water into Phoenix, because we have no natural water source here, it comes from the Colorado River, I would find the most beautiful cardboard box that I could find, and I would make a thing of beauty out of it. And I felt myself settle down. It was like, oh yeah, I would be a mystic millionaire in a cardboard box. I could trust that 100% because the ability to create beauty is just a given in my life. That's how I know God. And I felt myself settle. It's like, yeah, there's nothing to be afraid of. There's nothing that can be taken from me. No one can take that ability to create beauty from me. It's mine. It's my gift. I'm divinely protected in that way. And what I know is that if I walk around in that space, I have lots of examples that life will take care of me. Beauty will take care of me. Wealth in many different forms will take care of me. It's a feeling. 80% of what intuition can do for us is an inside job. 20% is what we do with it, how we act on it and how we honor it and the decisions we make from it. But 80% is an inside job. When we absolutely trust it, when we look for it, when we ask for it, when we honor it, it's just given to us. I'm going to stop again and see if there are any additional thoughts or questions. Because I think we're about at the end of our time. Is that right, Dorda? Dorda, do you want to share anything before we wrap up? Look at her beautiful energy. Oh my gosh, she's just always so beautiful. Just beautiful, brilliant smile.
Yeah. No, I think you're a living example of trusting the intuitive, even before you knew that that was what you were doing. And from having the privilege of having you as my mentor for part of my journey, that's one of the things I've really appreciated was you honoring your intuition and bringing up what came to you, even if it maybe didn't make sense, but it always did. My favorite example, and I've shared this sometimes, was that you once asked me if I'd ever considered writing a book. And I never have, and I still don't. But it got me curious because it came up intuitively for you and it had a message for me. And so I looked into this writing thing and I joined a writing class with Jules Swales. And it became an important part of my journey in discovering my voice, knowing myself more and finding my voice for sharing the principles in my stories. So that was definitely intuitively guided, even if you didn't know the purpose of it and I didn't, but it was meant to come up in that conversation. And I love that you trust that even with your clients to bring up what occurs to you. And I think you probably knew that I would be facilitating the principles before I did.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Abundantly clear.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So I love that. And I love a lot of the different stories in the book, but I also love your transparency in your getting to know the three principles. I love that you put forward in the book, which when you struggled with getting a hold of what is this three principles thing, and what is this thing about thought? How does it relate to what I've learned about psychology? And I love that. I think it's a really valuable journey to invite readers on, and especially newer people in the principles. I think it's so nice to be part of that journey with you. And because I often talk to people who are also on their journey to share what they see about the principles. I loved your story about sharing with Sid your very first metaphor that you thought were a little rudimentary. And I loved his response, you know, that, oh yeah, but that's okay because it's authentic, it's you, and then people will hear it. I think that was also such a beautiful example of how it's not what comes through us, like it's not the how elegant it is or how well put it is. It is that it's true. It's that it comes from our own heart in that moment. That's what will allow other people to hear what we're trying to say. Yeah. So thank you so much for putting it all in a book, Linda, for all of us to be with you on that journey. I think it's so beautiful, and I really honor your faith and courage to be vulnerable and show parts of yourself that a lot of us keep to ourselves or our closest, and you put it out on paper for all of us to join you on your journey through it. Thank you. And thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. And thank you all. I can't believe that 30 some people took the time to be here. And I think the book, is available in Denmark through the...
Yes, Casper has it in Butikken. Yeah, so you can get it really easy. And for those of you that are going to the højskole, I know that Casper will have his books there too. Yeah.
And if you like it, or even if you don't, even if you hate it, and you put a review on Amazon or Goodreads, it will really help it get to others, and let people know that what your authentic reaction was to it. So thank you for listening, and thank you for being here. And my email address is Linda, Linda, at Linda Sandel, Pettit, Linda, at Linda, SANDELPETTIT.com. And it sometimes takes me a little while because the volume of email has gotten a little bit high since the book came out, but I always respond to everyone. So if you have a thought you want to share or a question, feel free to email me. Thank you all. Have a great rest of your day. I so appreciate you and your time. Love you dearly for being here, and yeah, just gifting me with your presence.